All right, we're live. Welcome to episode 43 of Turf Chat for the Turf Disease website. Breaking from what we've done in the past few weeks where we had somebody present a PowerPoint, we thought we would just open it up to kind of the old school Turf Chats where we went around in roundtable fashion and just bounced some ideas and thoughts. And with Larry and Ben and myself, we thought we'd make it about turf pests that we're seeing around the country. And so yeah, I think we'll just go from there. So I'm going to let the guests introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with you, Ben. You can.
Ben McGraw, Pennsylvania State University. I am an associate professor here. My area of expertise is turfgrass entomology.
All right, I'm Larry Stowell from Pest Turf out in San Diego, pestturf.org. I'm sort of have to put on a few different hats out here, so we don't get to specialize that much.
Yeah, but as a consultant, I mean, you know a lot about a lot of things. So,
or a little about a lot of things.
No, I think you know a lot. But so, Ben, the reason that I wanted to have you on here to begin with is you are traveling quite a bit for research, weevil track, and all your annual bluegrass weevil stuff back and forth. And I know you're seeing a lot of European crane fly stuff, I think. Did we ever figure out what that was on the golf course the other day? Do you think it was crane flies?
It's funny because I I'll mention that later, but I pulled up photos from last year, same fairway, exact same issue. So we've got some sort of vertebrate that's out there digging around, making some sort of hook like, I'm thinking it's a skunk. But that could be a numerous tasty morsels that are lying just below the soil surface. But it is the time in the Northeast when it could be either white grubs that vertebrates are looking for or European crane flies. So as John mentioned, I do travel quite a bit in the springtime. Our lab is heavily focused on early spring pests, annual bluegrass weevil, European crane fly, even some chinch bugs start rolling early in the year. But annual bluegrass weevil is the main focus at this point of the year. Actually, with all the COVID-19 restrictions, and we've really stripped down the amount of travel and how we're kind of working in my laboratory. So my technician, Danny Klein, works opposite of me. He goes to central Pennsylvania, the Harrisburg area, once a week. And I do Pittsburgh on Mondays and Fridays. So actually our travel is greatly reduced. None of my graduate students are working active projects at the moment. Everybody's at home writing. So the graduate students have kind of taken the biggest hit of the year. And it's unfortunate because they kind of do the most exciting things, the big picture questions. So we're mostly scouting, making sure that people are, providing information so people can time their insecticides wisely. It is a very important time of the year for managing annual bluegrass weevil for much later in the year. So as far as what we're seeing, very bizarre year, probably the strangest weather year that I've had since I started here in August of 2014. Really early warm up in February. We don't start really tracking pest activity until March 1st, or at least temperature accumulations for growing degree day calculations. But very early February made us think that we were easily 3 weeks ahead by March 1st than what we would say a normal year is. That being said, we've had a lot of starts and stops. We've had a significant cold period to now where we should be well into the first generation of larvae. And I would say we are somewhere about 2 weeks behind in what I would say a normal annual bluegrass weevil larval season would be. It could catch up really quickly with a couple of really warm weeks. We're starting to get some weather that's conducive to moving larvae along, but for the most part, what we're seeing is a really long period where adults were out and could have been controlled. They laid eggs, and those eggs have hatched out, but they're really not progressing very quickly. So normally what I see in the beginning of May for annual bluegrass weevil in most parts in Pennsylvania is every week we're moving up an instar, first instar, second instar, all the way up to fifth instar by the end of the month, Memorial Day. We are stuck between first and second instars for the last 3 weeks. So very, very bizarre.
Do you think if they're stuck at that instar and then all of a sudden you get this warm weather, are they going to move through those instars more synchronously, like where they're like?
That is the potential, and that's what I'm hoping to see. Some of, we do have some trial areas where nothing is treated. And so we can kind of gauge how populations move in an untreated sense. The other courses that I consult with have all made adulticide applications, followed it with early larvicide. And so before that early larvicide, what we were seeing is it was very synchronous, and I assume that was from applying the adulticide and kind of compressing those stages together, which is what we want to see. But Mother Nature might have done the same thing as you suggested. It might have been, the adults were out, but it wasn't warm enough to really stimulate a lot of egg laying to where we could have very different stages even by early May. So I do think there's going to be some positives coming out of this spring. I think also, like the COVID-19 restrictions, the reduced staffs, lack of golfers out on the golf course was also a real benefit, I think, to managing this insect, that people could maybe make an application against the adults later in the day when activity was warmer, and therefore the insecticide might come in contact with the insect a little bit better. They could apply it with the appropriate amount of irrigation rather than having to wait until the end of the night. So it's hard to say whether these things are going to be noticeable differences in the field. What we see in our trials, a 10 to 20% difference in control might not be observed to the superintendent. But I got to think that there are a lot of things that are beneficial that are coming out of these really unprecedented times. So that's annual bluegrass weevil. We're approaching a really important stage, what we call stage 3, which would be the third application for some people, which is we're trying to target the larvae as they move out of the plant and into the soil. There's a lot of products that work and work very well at that time. So that's what we're kind of gearing up to look at. That might not happen until first week in June, which is crazy. We're usually done with our trials the first week of June. We're evaluating all our trials. So that would be about 2 weeks behind. Other things that we've seen that have been on the rise, European crane flies are kind of all over the place. We have one species that is flying in the springtime, and we've seen flights for the 2 months. Last year, we saw flights in Pittsburgh, April 23rd. This year, we saw our first flights, March 23rd. And just yesterday in Pittsburgh and Sunday here in State College, saw plenty of adults flying. So really long extended window of adults flying there. That is the lesser of the two crane fly pests, but I'm getting lots of reports of people seeing them for the first time in much greater area throughout the region, down into Virginia, west into Ohio and whatnot. So those are the two main ones. Really bad year for chinch bugs. I'm not from an entomologist standpoint. That's how I think. Man, I can't find. We installed this massive research facility for chinch bugs, fine fescues, little 3x3 plots, probably 1,000 plots. And once we did that, that was 3 years ago. I really haven't seen too much chinch bug activity, unfortunately.
Isn't that what happens though? You have
That's what happens. Yeah.
Rid of them, yeah, just put in a research trial.
Yeah, so chinch bug is one that seems to be increasing on people's lists. We've had a couple of really wet springs, which I think naturally suppresses their populations. There's some evidence for that. It's a debated topic, but we just haven't seen great pressures. Usually chinch is something that bites you really hard one time and then you get it under control, and it's pretty simple to control. But it seems to be worse in years where we have a really warm spring where their populations build up. They have multiple generations. And typically we see damage in August into September when we get drying conditions on the other end of the season, and it just that extra stressor from the piercing sucking insect just collapses the turf stand. So those are kind of the things on my radar. Grubs are chilling out for a while. People have put down preventive applications, products like chlorantraniliprole or acelepryn. People are using imidacloprid. That timing is going to be much later down the road. Yeah. So that's kind of the quick wrap up of what we're seeing in the region.
We had some people. It's my door. They're delivering alcohol. I'm going to take that. You guys keep talking for a second.
So one thing, and I'll talk because Larry and I are just left here alone, but another project that we're working on is in the southern Utah, Las Vegas region with the flea beetle that Adam Van Dyke and I have been kind of working on. With the southern Utah population that we saw last year, the flea beetle did not arrive until really late in the summer. So we'd find a couple of stages here and there throughout the year, but it seemed to kind of explode in July. And that was on perennial ryegrass in southern Utah. We've since reached out to more superintendents and people in Las Vegas have sent Adam samples, different turfgrass. And so that's Bermuda, and we're already starting to find larvae there. So that's a really interesting project. I was really hoping to spend some time in Las Vegas this summer.
That's dangerous for you.
I just had another trip canceled for this summer, so it doesn't look like that's going to happen this year. But really fascinating project. Really never seen before turf pest. Very similar to dichondra flea beetle, which will attack Bermuda grass, but we shipped it off to the USDA, and it's definitely not dichondra.
Well, sorry for missing out on part of what you guys were talking about. I had my Woodford delivery coming this afternoon, and you have to sign for it, so I didn't want to not open the door. But before I left, I was going to say we had some people that joined a little bit late, participants, and so I was going to say if anybody wants to ask a question or has something they want to say, you can put it in the question and answer of the chat, and then we'll try to address those things. I missed the last part of it, but Larry, what's going on out in the West Coast?
Yeah, it's kind of weird out here. We have, so we got like 12 climate zones, so it's all over the board where different types of things that will happen all the time. But most common stuff that's cooking right now is brown ring patch, some leftover anthracnose from last year if somebody had a serious problem. Then as we get into the drier season, we get drought stress that sort of complicates some of the diagnostic work that goes on. And then maybe we'll still get a little bit of microdochium patch, still cool enough. And then as it starts to warm up, and we try to go for like a 65-degree soil temperature or a 65 degrees on a 5-day running average temperature, which comes out of roughly the same. Get a few days of that, then people start working on their preventive apps for summer patch and maybe a little bit of Pythium root dysfunction if they've had a history of that. And the brown ring patch will keep cooking through. And then the anthracnose will come in, and that'll start causing some problems. Usually, a lot of times, stress related. And then some as the irrigation season develops, they'll start getting some problems with rapid blight, something like that. That's kind of the way the seasons go.
How common is rapid blight out there on an annual basis? Do people that have it, they just get it every year because of their water?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's just around all the time. It's when the salts accumulate, it just takes out the POA, and it'll do some. Well, it's in Arizona where they have bad irrigation water quality, or they have their salts accumulate on the ryegrass. So it's either or the POA triv or the ryegrass overseeds are a problem, but people are starting to not overseed as much. And one of the reasons it was rapid blight on some places, they just couldn't afford to keep the overseeding going with the rapid blight at the same time, because there's really not a way to control it other than with some kind of application like you have to put a fungicide down. You can't. I can't even remember Paracastropin to keep it under control. And then the insects come in, later on. So around June we have the chafers and black turfgrass tunia start coming in. They usually get controlled about the same time. Late June application keeps them, most of them down, except there's another species out in the desert here, which is Cyclocephalurta, which pops up in the fall, which is kind of a weird one also. And then we're kind of hamstrung a little bit out here, because we don't have a full-time turf pathologist. when I'm saying a turf pathologist, they have people that do some turf pathology work, but someone who would collect isolates, maintain virulent strains of things for testing, that type of thing. So we don't have a turf pathologist. We don't really have an entomologist specializing in turfgrass either. I'm trying to think. I don't think we have a weed scientist either. So you get out here in the West.
What's Baird? What's he?
He's
Agronomist?
He's agronomy, but he's put together a team that handles pathology in some of these other areas, but not with the in depth that you would have a full FTE person. So there'll be staff people. They'll get the job done as far as testing products and practices and a little bit of stuff, but nobody to dig into genetics and all the other stuff that you would in a sort of a classical, what we would call turf pathology program.
Yeah. It always blows my mind that California is such a big state and has so many golf courses and turfgrass important things like that, and they don't put any effort into the university.
It's like 1,000 courses, and they just can't. They used to be able to do it. They had a lot of good research. I'm not saying that Jim is doing a great job, but he's just constrained by the industry's lack of support. If he could add on a whole turf pathology lab, not just a person sort of working on it, and it's tough because it's hard for someone to work under sort of restrictive conditions where you don't really have the resources to do all of the work you would like to do. Fixing up with the getting figuring out what isolates and strains are coming in when, but they're doing a good job for what they've got.
I'm surprised at how spread he is on that, because I went to it's the Shadow, whatever the course is out just north of San Francisco. He's got a bunch of projects and studies out there, and then he's you go to Vegas, and he's like going to Vegas to put out trials and stuff.
He's working on everything. He's got a little bit of everything going out there. I do not envy his his role, because it's got to be it's just rough. But he's doing a good job for spread as thin as he is. I wish just a shame that he doesn't get more support.
Well, you mentioned a bunch of diseases and pests that you're seeing out there, and Ben talked about what we're seeing in Pennsylvania or this area. But from the disease standpoint, 2 weeks ago we were getting riddled by microdochium patch. It was cold and just wiping things out, and brown ring patch was in there as well. And now we're in the 60s and starting to get up into the 70s. And I think we're initiating dollar spot trials this week just to get a little bit ahead of it. We're in the same boat as you. We're transitioning out of that brown ring patch. Microdochium, red thread is still seemed like it was a big problem this year. But we're right on the verge of dollar spot and anthracnose. That to us is usually late May, early June. And that's kind of where we are right now. I've also seen a lot of weird things. If you look on Twitter, someone had just posted like slime mold pictures, which is an anomaly. We see them, but it's like, that's one thing that I've seen pop up several times. And Ben, I'm sure you've seen it too, but like I'm seeing more mole cricket pictures. I don't know if it's just that people are posting them because they're cool pictures, or if like it seems unusually busier this year with those things. You're muted, Ben.
I've been seeing some of the mole cricket postings from the south and trying to get egg hatch on, but I did receive my first northern mole cricket one, which is seems to be an annual rite of passage for most people. And people thinking that, they found southern mole crickets in the north, but we do have a native species here that we see around water hazards and flooded areas. One course in particular, I know in the New York City area has to control them every year. They're that bad on the property, but that's one out of my lifetime of working in this field that I know of in the north. That's a problem. So mole crickets are one. John, I was going to ask you too. I need you to look at one of my POA research greens, because we get this. We get a disease every year that it's not anthracnose, but it's a bronzing. It's very coppery. And I thought it would, in years past, we were doing different things with annual bluegrass weevil and mowing heights. And I thought it might just be some scalping of the turf because we were taking down these heights rather rapidly. It wasn't anything that we're trying to maintain in the long term, but every year on that croquet court of ours, we get this kind of blotchy bronze-like patch that comes in, almost like a streaking in the sense of Pythium, but definitely not Pythium.
It could be still, you know, on that shorter cut turf, you can kind of get microdochium patch that can come in these like really brownish bronzy, and they can definitely track with mowers and stuff. So that could be what it is. I could go out there and take a sample and look under the scope. Well, we're still getting some samples here sent, and I'm just having them send it to my home, and then I take it in to diagnose it. But it's all the same stuff. It's like microdochium that people don't think are hanging around this long because it's, you know, late May. But I've seen microdochium in Maryland in June. You know, all it takes is the right weather conditions. It doesn't really matter what time of year it is. That's why the stuff with you're working on, Ben, is fascinating to me, because they have these life cycles, right? And they have to go through these stages and they progress. Whereas like our disease is like they can come and come back and go, and you know, it just seems a little bit more weather dependent. The question I had for you, Ben, was about the scouting. So you always say, like, it's not that hard to, you know, come up with a spray program and a timing on this. But like, obviously people are bringing you out there to look at it. When you go and do scouting, what are you doing?
Well, we definitely have different techniques for different stages in different times of the year. So most of my scouting really kind of starts when we would expect to see annual bluegrass weevil activity. So for the most part, I mean, because it is the most severe pest that we have, annual bluegrass weevil is what we're scouting for. You know, in certain courses, we'll hire our laboratory to help them out. And, you know, hopefully after a year, they've got that under control where they start having us look for other things. So depending on the course, we might be doing different things. But for annual bluegrass weevil, we vacuum sample for adults. Adults can be picked up with a reverse leaf blower. So the first couple of weeks of the season might just be just vacuuming all over the place to try to get an idea. The other thing too with that insect is it seems like we move it around the property. They'll have historical hotspots that they alert us to, and we go there and we get a good idea about the population based on that area. And then we come back the next year and we can't find them in that area, but now they're a problem on 16. So vacuum sampling is a big part of what we do for scouting. Really fast, non-destructive, gets you a relative answer pretty quickly, and you can track it over time. So earlier in the year, we're running vacuums quite a bit. Not that I'm not now. You know, yesterday in Pittsburgh, I was doing a lot of vacuuming because it was a nice weather day. The vacuum seems to be a little bit weather dependent on how effective it is. And so I was concerned that, you know, maybe we had another surge of adults, or maybe I've overlooked things. And luckily, neither of those things happened on the 3 properties I was on, but we didn't see a big spike in adults, which was a fear. However, about, you know, 3 weeks ago, we start soil sampling. So that's kind of, you know, a main staple of any turfgrass entomologist's repertoire is just pulling plugs, bringing them back to the lab, using high temperatures to extract larvae out of the plant. So that would work for crane flies, that would work for annual bluegrass weevil. What we're trying to do at that time, so maybe the courses I work with aren't pleased with me, because then my sampling becomes much quicker. I get on, plug, and then I'm to the next plate. But the real magic happens back at the lab, and it takes, you know, probably 24, but we let it go for a little bit longer to extract everything. It dries the core down. We invert the core over a funnel. They drop into a soap, and that contains the insect in that soapy solution. Then I can look at it. I can measure the head capsule. So the width of the head, insects are, you know, they grow in spurts, essentially. They don't continuously grow. So each time they molt, they get into a bigger body. So by measuring the width of the head capsule, you can get an age on the insect. And so what we're looking for is, how old is the population? What's the relative age of these individuals in the population, so that we can then time larvicides. So vacuuming, soil coring is important.
How many head capsule measurements do you have to do in a sampling?
Oh my God, one of our sites is just loaded, and that's, you know, if
Do
there's
you
one
do a
or two.
representative sample, or do you do like all of them?
You know, it's funny because sometimes they get in that soapy water in day one and then they bloat up. So you're like, wow, we've got third insars already. And then you look at it, it's got a tiny little head on it. So you really do need to kind of measure them all. If it's just for, you know, working with my courses to get a general timing on a larvicide, then obviously I'm not measuring them all. But if it's a research study where I need exact stage, then yes.
That seems
Well, seems like a great candidate for image analysis sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, it would be great. My colleague at Cornell, Kyle Wicking, has a great photo that you know, he had some DMP document that he developed and he sent it by me for edits, and he's got it on a penny, and it's something about the columns on the building on the penny. The larvae will fit into, you know, he's got them aged. I thought that was a really cool technique.
That's
so.
a good idea.
That is funny.
But
Hey, you ever try, you know, those crop vacs? You seen the ones that they use on the agriculture for sucking insects off?
yeah, so that's kind of the model for what we have. So that's called a DVAC. Yeah, so like in agricultural crops, you'd have this backpack on, this massive
No,
vacuum.
I'm talking about maybe something mounted on equipment.
Oh yeah.
So the guys who did out and mow and suck.
Yeah, so Larry, in your part of the world, it was a group out of Salinas, maybe Salinas, Gilroy, somewhere in that area. So it's a big strawberry growing area.
Well, in fact, if I share my screen, I can show you a bunch of the ones that are. Can I do that?
Should be able
Yeah.
to.
Look at this. I was just
I've looked into it. I looked at what it would take to get them because they're mounted on a tractor, and it looks like you could effectively vacuum quite a good area.
Sorry, Larry.
Yeah.
I just changed the settings so that you should be able to share it. It was only to me, but
yeah.
Didn't you develop a logo sometime, Ben?
I did.
Like these guys.
Yeah. The one with the yellow attachments is the one that down below.
They had a bunch. Tandem Oriental actually tried to. We worked with them for a while in.
That one right there. Yeah. What's that one?
In lettuce, where they had a ton. They were trying to do everything organic, and they went to bug vacs for their production system. Lightweight tractor, 4-wheel drive, lightweight tractors. That'd be. I don't know. It just seems like it would be kind of an interesting.
Yeah.
But that's not for sampling. That's for like to get
removal.
rid of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
No, but you'd have something smaller, you know, rather than kill it, which they were.
Well, I think the smaller the insect is more difficult. Plus, the canopy is so dense. So what you're looking at in that system in the Salinas area was strawberries. It's a ligus bug, so it's a true bug. It's, you know, like
they were lettuce. They were going for cutworms. Not cutworms.
I think the suction on something like that can be a lot less because you don't want to be pulling the plant out of the ground, where turf is fairly resilient. My advisor, PhD advisor, Albert Koppenhofer, just he had a USGA grant that I believe they've just completed the work where they looked at the effectiveness of our vacuums, which is a high CFM, really good suction close to the ground. Yeah. And I think his estimate was it pulled out like 5%. So that kind of, I think what you need kind of like, and I liken it to irrigation theory where you have a big intake pipe, you know, it's a massive diameter and just pulls slowly, you know, so you don't have fish going in the intake or small children swimming by and getting sucked into the pump house. But if you had a smaller intake, it would like pull really hard on that area. So I think if you had a series of small nozzles on some sort of tractor mounted thing, maybe it would work, but it's a little discouraging seeing Albrecht's results with that. But it was something that we figured. We do see that it's more effective to vacuum on warmer days. Colder days, they seem to be hunkered down and holding onto the leaf. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely what, you know, anybody who spends significant time vacuuming fairways greens and collars that you start thinking, hey, maybe this could be a control.
Well, we have digital innovation and ag as one of our new thematic areas in plant science. So maybe you should, work with the ag engineers and develop some autonomous vacuum sucker that goes around midday and just starts sucking.
There you go. Yeah, just a robot when it goes out there and sucks.
Yeah, I mean, like Jason Haynes' robots that I just pinging across his fairway all the time. I mean, I think it would have to be something like that. I mean, I'd like it just to be able to collect that many insects to work on. I mean, that's
what do you do with all the insects you collect?
I mean, in a normal year, we collect probably 5,000 adults to hopefully get a balanced sex ratio so that we could do egg laying studies or, take one from the pathologist where we infest areas rather than letting nature infest it for us. So kind of augment populations that way.
Yeah, I was thinking the suction on equipment, not to control the insects, just for sampling. So that if they just go out every time they mow, they would just have a pile of junk, and it could be, I don't know, you might even be able to get some, if you got clippings with diseases on them, you get some foliar disease.
Yeah, I mean, we
all in the blender and run it through a PCR and find out what's there.
Yeah, always trying to simplify and make it easy.
Yeah, I think that the other problem with vacuums in the Northeast during weevil season is you pick up a lot of granular fert and you pick up a lot of top dressing.
Yeah.
One of my colleagues was vacuuming a fairway one time, and the guy asked if he was going to be putting back that material, the fertilizer. So, and I've seen it too, where we vacuumed. And, we vacuum like in a zigzag. and then you come back like a week or 2 weeks later, and it's like green growth around chlorotic growth from not having nitrogen in those areas.
Yeah. It's almost like your lawn that you fertilized.
Oh, my God.
You see that picture, Larry?
Yeah.
People wouldn't bullshit about that. So the backstory of that, and this will be the only place where the backstory will be explained, is I had to do a trial for a company, and they wanted fertilizer as a component to this insecticide. And instead of like the 15 grams that we need for our research plots, I got 2 50-pound bags. So when I got,
Can you imagine what they paid on shipping on that?
I know. So when I got home, I just started flinging it all over the yard. Like, I just want to get rid of it. So
there's so many experimental chemicals and fertilizers applied to researchers' yards.
It's crazy. It's the best way to get rid of things.
Yeah, you gotta
totally. So
well, you told me about it, and I was thinking, like, I used to do that with top dressing. Like, I remember Mr. Ladshaw being like, "This is how you top dress," and you take a shot and spread it. And so I pictured that, thinking like, "Yeah, you probably made it pretty even." And then I saw the photos you posted, and everybody was commenting. Everybody went nuts.
Oh my God! You're gonna take my credentials away or something.
Yeah.
So that and the Walter Woods book that Andy Campbell's wife gave us, his history of greenkeeping, basically from his perspective at St. Andrews and stuff. Those guys would top dress greens that way, like you say. Like now, it makes you think like, right. They must have been so uneven.
Yeah, well, at least with the top dressing, it's not that big a deal. But if you start doing with fertilizer, quick release fertilizer, that's sort of strafing up your yard.
All right.
So we can wrap up, I think, in a few minutes. What I was going to ask is, for those people that are going to view this after the fact, or if anybody has questions, they can also type that into the chat. But what are the things in the next couple of weeks that we should all be looking out for in your respective areas?
I would say annual bluegrass weevil, definitely. Pretty much everything else is on cruise control, but next couple of weeks, I would start to expect to see larvae entering the soil, and with that, damage not too far behind.
So you say ABWs is the top one. What does Weevil Track offer? I'm not an entomologist, so I don't go in there very much. But what does Weevil Track offer in terms of like information for people? I mean, is it a really good site that has?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were doing the bare minimum as a superintendent, trying to control annual bluegrass Weevil Track should be your go-to reference. So what that involves is multiple researchers throughout the region who are doing just what I've described earlier, getting the data on the ground in different regions, putting it into kind of a area-wide mapping, if you will. And at the very least, it tells you when these events are happening in your area, because insects are cold-blooded and weather-dependent. These things kind of happen very predictably throughout the region. I think it's really nice, addition to your monitoring. I know some people rely on it as gospel, and that's fine too. I mean, I think you're going to be in a pretty good ballpark by following one or two clubs around you. I like to use it to see what my colleagues to the south of me are seeing. So Sam Camuso has a couple of sites in Maryland and Virginia. Because it's warmer than here, when those alerts trigger, I know that, maybe I need to focus more in one direction or the other. So I think it's a fabulous addition to anybody's monitoring program. Kind of gives you a good idea about what products of theirs that you could apply at those times to be most successful.
Yeah. And Larry, I know you have tons of good information on your site as well, and I'll make sure I put a link in the notes below of the YouTube to share some of your information. But you've got everything probably coming up because there's so many different areas, but what do you think some of the top couple things might be?
Yeah, I think it's just getting ready for, the summer patch and just keeping a track on those threats that are out there that'll be coming up as it warms up. It's nothing special, nothing unusual this time of year. Do we worry about? Let's see what we got presenting. Well, here's what we're getting into threats. Yeah, the diseases that we're popping up now are rapid blight, algae, brown ring patch, anthracnose, fairy ring. Yeah, you've got to watch out. If you had problems, fairy ring, you should be worrying about that. Spring dead spot's a little late to treat, but that's what's going to be showing up. We've seen a lot of people showing pictures of spring dead spot. Then summer patch and take all patch are all, in the range of starting to.
You were looking at, I think, your predictions from your site. Is that what you were looking at?
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Can you share that and let people see what you have?
This type of thing. So we provide what threats or forecasted threats, looking at the upcoming days. We give people their forecasted threat temperatures, a maximum amount of N. They won't need that much, but the maximum amount of N for cool and warm season grasses. Then we give some growing degree days, cool season growth potential, warm season growth potential. And this data is coming from San Diego. So you can see that, warm season grasses aren't growing very well, but cool season grasses are doing well. And then this is the Smith Kearns dollar spot model, but not in the correct way that they do it. This is without the 5-day running average. So this is more responsive. So you'd have to see a long stretch of dollar spot issues, threats before you get too worried about it.
Yeah.
But dollar spots cooked up. So that's the type of thing that we provide that 3 times a week. Via email.
That's awesome. So how do you, where are you putting all these models in? Are you, you just get all the models that are published and then you just put them into the system to kick those things out?
Yeah.
You're doing it. And I just think that, like, surprised that like a university, we always talk about this, Larry, where universities are always so heavily subsidized and they can produce shit for free and then, screws every consultant over. But I'm surprised that somebody doesn't have more of like Syngenta has it, where they have maps and growing degree days and for all these predictors. But, they're going to be talking about their products and stuff. I'm surprised there's not something more universal in the United States that like visually shows it. I think originally when turf diseases and turf path came out, that's what I was like, I envisioned, and then just not smart enough to figure out how to make it happen.
Well, I think it gets down. I don't know. I think people want more site specific for their locations, and that's what you try to do right in real time and deliver it in an easy way. So I don't know. We've been doing it for so long. We used to fax this stuff out 3 times a week. It was bulk fax. We didn't do it. We didn't manually fax it, but and people were really complained about that because I used to just grab the fax in the morning, go to the bathroom and they'd have a rundown for the day. And then we went
my coffee kicks in at 6:35. I better have that fax by then.
Right. So then we went to web-based, and nobody liked the web-based stuff. Some people use it, but they don't. If you have to go to a site, an internet site, that's more difficult. And then email seems to be accepted, but the most desired way was to actually have a piece of paper that you just grabbed and looked at, and then you could just throw it away or do whatever you want with it. But people having to look at computers, they're getting used to it, pretty much used to it now, but it still was easier on faxes. But you couldn't do color stuff or any of this type of thing.
Right.
And
I
then
think about the menus that come through our faxes still. We still get these menus for like local restaurants coming through the fax machine.
Yeah. And then it's like they can click on, there's references, all those things they can click on them and find the backgrounds for each one of those if they need it. So I don't know. It's just a simple solutions.
Yeah. Always very impressed with all the information and the technology you have on your website. So it's a good resource for people. From my standpoint, like I said, I think that we're probably a little early on Dollar Spot. Maybe down in the Philadelphia area, they're a little closer. It's almost like May 28th is like typical for State College. I've seen it as early as May 4th, but we're obviously not there this year. It's kind of cold on us, but that's kind of the next thing that we're worried about. I think that we're still in a decent timing because it was cold for the ferreting applications that you mentioned. And if we can keep this warm weather, then we won't have to be looking back at brown ring patch and microdocium, but you just never know what's going to happen. You get a little bit of cold weather and rain, and it'll flare up on us. So it's like, keep an eye out for those lingering issues and then start thinking about your preventive applications for Dollar Spot, those types of diseases. So that's all I got. I think that was good information for, kind of what's going on around the country. Ben, thanks, and Larry for joining us. Unless I see any questions in the Q&A, I'm gonna end it. But hopefully we'll be able to do this again sometime. I think these things, even though there's no PowerPoint and it's not all fancy, we're just sitting around talking, I still think it helps people to be thinking about all the things that are coming up and going on, because it's just superintendents and turf managers in general have so much on their plate that sometimes thinking pest management and all the opportunities for different things to come in, they don't necessarily grasp the scope of it. They stick to their plan that they created over winter, and then they're just on a calendar-based system. But if weather changes and things are different, then you never know what's going to pop up.
Yep.
All right. So with that, wrapping up episode 43. Ben, I will see you in a short bit out on the golf course.
That's right.
Social distancing, please. Don't come within 6 feet of me.
Absolutely.
And Larry, as always, what's that?
I was going to say, most people try not to, John.
Yeah, that's true. I shouldn't have to worry about that. All right. With that, I'm going to end the recording, but thanks again, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for having us.